People like him don't listen until it costs them. The chandelier light scattered across polished marble floors, catching the edges of crystal glasses and silver cutlery, turning every movement into something deliberate, almost rehearsed. In the center of it all sat Jonathan Reeves, a man whose time was measured in millions per hour, his tailored navy suit fitting like certainty itself, his watch glinting with quiet authority as he checked it for the third time in under a minute. Around him, laughter flowed easily, the kind that followed power, not humor, while deals worth more than most lifetimes hovered unspoken between sips of aged whiskey. And then there was her. Emily Carter moved through the room like she didn't belong to it, but not in the way people assumed. Her black uniform was simple, pressed, invisible by design, her hair pulled back neatly, her expression composed to the point of stillness. She carried a tray balanced with precision, her steps measured, her eyes noticing everything while revealing nothing. Most people never looked at her twice. That was the point. Jonathan didn't notice her either. Not at first. To him, she was part of the background, like the music humming softly through hidden speakers or the flicker of candlelight on white tablecloths. Replaceable, interchangeable, predictable. Another round, one of his associates said, raising a glass halfway before setting it down again, distracted by the numbers on his phone. Jonathan barely nodded, his attention elsewhere, scanning an email that hinted at a delay, a miscalculation, something that shouldn't have happened. His jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second before the mask returned. Control was everything. Control was how he built empires. Control was how he stayed untouchable. Emily approached the table with quiet efficiency, placing glasses exactly where they belonged, refilling water without interrupting the flow of conversation. She didn't rush. She didn't linger. She existed in that narrow space between being seen and being ignored. And yet, as she set down Jonathan's drink, her eyes flicked briefly to the screen of his phone. Just a second. Just enough. Numbers. Percentages. A structure she recognized instantly. She said nothing. Jonathan leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose, irritation slipping through the cracks of his composure. You ever notice, he said suddenly, loud enough for the table to hear, how everyone thinks they understand money until they actually have it? A few chuckles followed. Someone nodded too quickly. The kind of agreement that didn't question. Jonathan's gaze shifted, landing on Emily as if for the first time, his expression sharpening with mild amusement. Hey, he said, tapping the edge of the table lightly with one finger, a gesture that carried more command than volume. You. Emily stopped, turned, calm. Yes, sir. He smiled, but it wasn't warmth. It was curiosity mixed with boredom, the kind that looked for entertainment in unexpected places. Let's try something, he said, sliding his platinum card halfway across the table, the metal catching the light. Give me financial advice. Go on. If it's good, maybe I'll double your tip. The table laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just enough. Emily didn't react. Not to the laughter, not to the card, not to him. For a moment, the room continued exactly as it had before, glasses clinking, voices overlapping, the illusion of importance uninterrupted. Then she spoke. Softly, precisely. Are you looking for short-term gains, or something that lasts longer than your current strategy? The laughter stopped. Not all at once, but enough to matter. Jonathan's smile didn't disappear. It paused, just for a second. And in that second, something shifted. Not in the room. In him. Jonathan did not answer immediately. He leaned back slightly, his fingers resting against the edge of the table, his eyes narrowing just enough to signal interest without surrendering control. Around him, the quiet had changed. It was no longer casual. It was waiting. That is a bold question, he said finally, his voice even measured. Most people would just give me an answer. Emily did not move. Her posture remained straight, her hands lightly folded in front of her, her expression calm in a way that did not invite approval or fear. Most people do not manage your level of risk, she replied. No hesitation. No apology. Jonathan let out a soft breath that could have been a laugh, but it carried less amusement now. All right, he said, gesturing slightly with his hand, as if granting permission. Assume I am listening. Convince me. A few of his associates shifted in their seats, exchanging glances that were harder to read now. This was no longer entertainment. This was something else. Emily stepped just a fraction closer to the table, not enough to intrude, just enough to be heard without raising her voice. Your current portfolio is overexposed to short-term volatility, she said. You are chasing aggressive returns in saturated markets. Jonathan's expression did not change, but his fingers stopped moving. She continued. If you are aiming for something sustainable, you would reduce exposure by at least 30% and redirect into emerging sectors that are undervalued because they are not trending yet. One of the men at the table let out a quiet scoff, but it faded quickly when Jonathan did not react. His attention was fixed now. Completely. Go on, he said. Emily nodded once, as if acknowledging the instruction rather than the man. Energy infrastructure in developing regions, she said. Not the ones already flooded with capital. The ones where demand is growing faster than regulation can slow it down. You gain tax advantages, long-term contracts, and less competition from institutional investors. Jonathan's jaw tightened slightly. Not disagreement. Recognition. And liquidity, he asked, his tone sharper now, testing. 10% minimum, she replied immediately. Positioned for opportunistic acquisition when corrections hit. Not before. Timing matters more than access. Silence settled again, but this time it was heavier. Intentional. The kind that did not leave room for dismissal. Jonathan leaned forward slowly, his elbows resting on the table, his gaze locked onto her in a way that stripped away everything else in the room. That is specific, he said. Uncomfortably specific. Emily did not look away. You asked for advice, she said simply. One of the associates shifted again, this time with less confidence. You read that somewhere? He asked, attempting a smile that did not quite land. Emily shook her head once. No, sir. Jonathan tilted his head slightly, studying her as if recalculating something he had misjudged. Then where does it come from? He asked. There was no accusation in his voice now. Only curiosity. Real curiosity. Emily glanced briefly at the table, at the untouched drink in front of him, at the phone screen that had gone dark, then back to his eyes. From watching patterns, she said, and from understanding what people overlook when they believe they are ahead. Jonathan held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then, slowly, he reached for his phone, turning it back on, scrolling once, twice, before stopping. His expression did not change, but something behind it did. Something quieter, sharper. Interesting, he murmured, almost to himself. And for the first time that evening, Jonathan Reeves was no longer the one controlling the conversation. Jonathan did not blink. Not when she finished. Not when the silence settled into something heavier than before. He simply watched her, the way a man watches a detail that does not fit into his system, something small that threatens to unravel something much larger. Then, slowly, he smiled again. But this time, it was different. Less performance. More calculation. You are either very well rehearsed, he said, his voice quieter now, more focused, or you are very dangerous to underestimate. Emily said nothing. She did not react to the compliment hidden inside the suspicion. She simply stood there, steady, as if neither version of his statement required correction. Jonathan tapped his phone screen once, then turned it slightly toward himself, scrolling through a document with a speed that suggested familiarity rather than curiosity. Numbers moved under his thumb. Charts. Allocations. Real data. His data. The table around him had gone completely still now. No one interrupted. No one joked. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to soften, as if the room itself understood something had shifted. You mentioned overexposure, Jonathan said, without looking up. 30%. Reduction. His thumb stopped. Which positions would you cut first? It was not a joke anymore. It was a test. A real one. Emily's eyes moved briefly to the screen. Not long enough to read everything. Just long enough to confirm what she already suspected. Patterns. Structures. The kind that repeated when people believed complexity could hide simplicity. Your renewable holdings in Western markets, she said. They are inflated by competition, not value. Jonathan's thumb moved again. A pause. Then stillness. Explain, he said. Emily took a breath. Not nervous. Measured. Too much capital is chasing the same limited opportunities, she said. It creates artificial growth. It looks strong on paper, but it is fragile. One policy shift, one subsidy change, and the margins collapse. One of the men at the table leaned back slowly, his expression tightening, as if something uncomfortable had just been said out loud. Jonathan's eyes lifted from the screen. "And you think I missed that?" he asked. It was not defensive. It was precise. Emily met his gaze without hesitation. "I think you saw it," she said. "But you stayed because everyone else did." The words did not land loudly. They landed accurately. That was worse. Jonathan stared at her for a long second. Then another. His jaw shifted slightly, the smallest sign of something adjusting beneath the surface. He looked back at his phone, scrolled again, faster this time, then stopped. Completely. "That position," he said slowly, almost to himself. "Singapore expansion." His voice lowered. "We projected 8% growth." Emily tilted her head just slightly. Not correcting, not interrupting, just waiting. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "It delivered 3.2, he continued. The numbers hung in the air. Real now, no longer abstract. He looked up again. This time, there was no trace of amusement left. "Why?" he asked. It was a simple question, but it carried weight. Emily did not answer immediately. She let the silence sit for just a moment longer, long enough for the question to settle fully into the space between them. Then she spoke. "Because you trusted the wrong analysis," she said. Jonathan's expression hardened, not in anger, in focus. "That is a broad claim," he said. Emily shook her head slightly. "No," she replied. "It is a specific one." The table felt smaller now, tighter, like the air itself had shifted direction. Jonathan leaned forward again, slower this time, his attention absolute. "Then be specific," he said. Emily's gaze did not waver. Not for a second. "The projection model underestimated regulatory delays," she said, "and overestimated local adoption rates by almost double." Jonathan's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of his phone, just enough to be noticed. "That report came from one of my top analysts," he said. Emily nodded once. "Calm. Certain." "Yes," she said. A pause. Then, quieter. "It did." Jonathan did not move. Not at first. The words settled into him slowly, like something sinking beneath still water, deeper than it appeared on the surface. Around the table, no one spoke. No one reached for a glass. Even the quiet hum of the restaurant felt distant now, like it belonged to a different world. "That analyst," Jonathan said carefully, his voice lower, controlled in a way that suggested precision rather than calm, "has been with my firm for 5 years. Emily nodded once. "I know." 2 simple words. No hesitation. No room for misinterpretation. Jonathan's eyes sharpened. "You know," he repeated, as if testing the weight of that statement. Emily held his gaze. "Yes." The answer did not expand. It did not defend itself. It simply existed. Jonathan leaned back slightly, studying her again, but this time the calculation had changed. He was no longer measuring her confidence. He was measuring her accuracy. "Then tell me something," he said, his tone quieter now, more deliberate. "If the model was flawed, why did no one catch it?" Emily did not answer immediately. She glanced briefly at the table, at the men who had stopped pretending to be uninvolved, then back at Jonathan. "Because it looked right," she said. The structure was clean. The assumptions were subtle, and it confirmed what everyone wanted to believe. One of the men shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Another looked down at his glass, as if the reflection there was suddenly more interesting than the conversation. Jonathan's expression remained still, but something in his eyes tightened. Recognition, not of her, of the truth behind what she was saying. "Confirmation bias," he murmured, almost to himself. Emily gave a small nod. "Exactly." Jonathan tapped his phone once more, pulling up a section of the report, his eyes scanning quickly, then slowing, then stopping. A detail, something he had seen before, something he had accepted without question. Until now. "The adoption rate," he said quietly. "It was projected at 12% in the first year." Emily did not move. "Yes. Actual numbers came in at just over 6, he continued. Emily's voice remained steady. "Because the regulatory approval timeline was delayed by 8 months. Jonathan's fingers tightened slightly around his phone. Not visibly enough for most people to notice, but enough. "That delay was not in the original model," he said. Emily tilted her head just slightly. "No," she replied. "It was not." The air shifted again. Not louder, not dramatic, just heavier. Jonathan looked up at her slowly, his gaze no longer questioning, but searching. "So either my analyst missed it," he said, "or they ignored it." Emily met his eyes without flinching. Or, she said softly, they were not the one who built the model. The words landed with quiet precision. No force, no emphasis. And yet they changed everything. Jonathan's expression froze for a fraction of a second. Not confusion, not disbelief. Something sharper, something closer to realization. What are you saying? He asked. This time, there was no trace of amusement, no trace of superiority. Just a question. Emily took a breath, slow and measured, her hands still at her sides, her posture unchanged. I am saying, she began, her voice calm but unmistakably firm, that the person you trusted to understand the model may not have understood it at all. The table felt smaller now, the space between them thinner. Jonathan did not look away. And you would know that how? He asked. A simple question, but it carried weight now. Real weight. Emily held his gaze for a moment longer. Then, quietly, she answered. Because. You left, he said finally. Emily shook her head once. No, she replied. I was removed. The words were calm. Too calm to be defensive. Too precise to be vague. Jonathan's fingers tapped once against the table, a habit returning without permission. Why? He asked. This time, there was no audience in his tone. No table. No room. Just a question between two people. Emily glanced down briefly, not to avoid, but to gather the exact wording, then back up again. Because I refused to adjust the projections, she said. The numbers did not support the narrative they wanted. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in disbelief, in recognition. So someone else adjusted them, he said. Emily nodded. Yes. And took credit for the model, he added. Yes. The pattern completed itself in his mind, piece by piece, each part locking into place with uncomfortable clarity. Jonathan leaned back slowly, his gaze drifting for a moment, not away from her, but through the layers of what he had accepted without question. 5 years. Trusted analyst. Clean reports. Approved deals. He exhaled once, controlled, but heavier than before. Then his eyes returned to her. Different now. Not measuring. Not testing. Seeing. And now you are here, he said quietly. Emily gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Yes. Jonathan glanced at the platinum card still resting on the table between them. It looked different now. Smaller. Less relevant. He reached for it, then paused, his fingers hovering just above it before pulling back. You could have said nothing, he said. Most people would have. Emily's expression did not change. Most people were not asked, she replied. The answer landed without force, but it stayed. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment, the room around them slowly returning, faint sounds creeping back in, but never fully reclaiming the space that had shifted. No, he said finally, his voice lower, steadier. They were not. And for the first time that evening, Jonathan Reeves understood that this had never been a joke. Jonathan did not reach for his drink. He did not look at his phone. For a man who had built his life on constant motion, on decisions made in seconds, and executed in minutes, he was still, completely still. His gaze remained on Emily, but it was no longer the gaze of someone evaluating a variable. It was the gaze of someone realizing the equation had been wrong from the beginning. How long, he asked quietly, have you been here? Emily followed the question exactly as it was asked. No interpretation, no assumption. At the restaurant, she said, 8 months. Jonathan's brow tightened slightly. And before that, a small pause. Not hesitation. Precision. Working, she replied. Jonathan's eyes sharpened. That is not an answer. Emily held his gaze. It is the only one that matters now. The words were not defensive. They were final. Jonathan leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose, his fingers brushing once against the edge of the table before settling again. Around them, the restaurant had resumed its rhythm, but it felt distant, like something happening behind glass. Conversations continued. Glasses clinked, but none of it touched the space at this table. You understand what you are implying, he said after a moment. If what you are saying is accurate, then my firm made a decision based on a compromised model. Emily did not flinch. Yes. And that decision cost us millions, he continued. Emily's voice remained even. More than that, over time. Jonathan's jaw tightened slightly. Not in anger. In alignment. Pieces locking into place whether he wanted them to or not. And the person responsible, he said, has been reporting directly to me for years. Emily did not answer. She did not need to. Jonathan's eyes dropped briefly to the table, to the untouched card, to the glass he had not lifted, then back to her. Why did you not challenge it again, he asked. If you knew the model was altered. Emily's expression did not change, but something in her voice shifted, just slightly, not softer, but more grounded. Because the first time was enough, she said. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Explain. Emily took a slow breath. When I raised concerns, she said, I was told the projections needed to align with strategic expectations. She paused, just long enough for the words to settle. When I did not adjust them, I was no longer part of the project. Jonathan's fingers curled slightly against the table. So they replaced you? Yes. And no one followed up. Emily shook her head once. The results looked good on paper. Jonathan let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Of course they did. He looked at her again, longer this time, as if recalibrating not just her role, but his own. You are aware, he said, that most people in your position would have used this moment differently. Emily did not react. How so, she asked. Jonathan gestured lightly toward the table, toward the card, toward the unspoken opportunity sitting between them. Leverage, he said. Information like this has value. Emily's gaze remained steady. So does integrity. The words were quiet, but they did not move. Jonathan held her eyes for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. You are not interested in leverage, he said. Emily shook her head. No, then why tell me, he asked. This time, the question carried something else. Not suspicion, not testing, something closer to understanding. Emily glanced briefly at the glass in front of him, still untouched, then back at his face. Because you asked, she said. No emphasis, no explanation, just the truth, stated without decoration. Jonathan looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid between them became clear. Not power, not status, something simpler, something harder to ignore. Most people, he said slowly, would have stayed silent. Emily's expression did not change. Most people, she replied, were not listening. And this time, Jonathan did not respond immediately. Because for the first time, he was. Jonathan did not look away. Not when she finished. Not when the quiet stretched again, settling into something deeper than before. He simply sat there, his posture unchanged, but the weight behind it different now. Less certainty, more awareness. Then, slowly, he reached for the check folder resting at the edge of the table. Not hurried, not dramatic, just deliberate. He opened it, glanced at the total without really seeing it, then picked up the pen. The movement was familiar, automatic, something he had done thousands of times without thought. But this time, there was a pause, a fraction of a second where his hand hovered above the paper. Not because of the number, because of what it meant now. Emily remained where she was, not stepping forward, not stepping back, her presence steady, unchanged by the shift that had taken place. She did not watch the pen. She watched him. Jonathan wrote a number. Large. Intentional. Then he stopped. Looked at it. And for the first time that evening, it did not feel like control. It felt like compensation. He set the pen down slowly, his fingers resting against the edge of the folder for a moment before closing it. Then he slid it across the table toward her. Not as a gesture of power. As an offering. Emily glanced down briefly at the folder. Then back at him. She did not reach for it. Jonathan noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything now. It is fair, he said quietly. Not defensive. Not persuasive. Just stated. Emily's expression remained calm. I did not give you advice for money, she replied. Jonathan nodded once, as if he had expected that answer, though something in his eyes suggested it still landed. I know, he said. A pause. Then, more carefully, that is not what this is. Emily tilted her head slightly. Not questioning. Waiting. Jonathan leaned forward just a fraction, his voice lower now, more direct, stripped of the tone he had carried earlier. It is acknowledgement, he said. Emily held his gaze for a moment, then glanced down again at the folder. Her hand moved this time. Slowly. She reached out, not to take it, but to slide it back across the table toward him. The motion was smooth. Final. Acknowledgement does not come from a number, she said. The words were quiet, but they did not leave room for interpretation. Jonathan's hand remained still as the folder returned to him. He did not push it back. He did not argue. He simply looked at it for a moment, then closed his hand over it, not as possession, but as acceptance of what it no longer represented. Around them, the restaurant continued as if nothing had changed. Orders were placed. Laughter returned in distant corners. Glasses caught the light again. But at this table, something had shifted permanently. Jonathan looked up at her once more. Not as a customer. Not as a man testing limits. As someone who had just been shown something he could not unsee. "If I asked you to come back," he said slowly, choosing each word with care. "Not as this." He gestured lightly toward her uniform, then let the motion fall away. "But as someone who belongs in those rooms again." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Emily's eyes remained steady. There was no surprise in them. No hesitation. Just clarity. "I never stopped belonging there," she said. The answer landed without force. But it held. Jonathan exhaled once, a quiet release of something he had been holding without realizing it. Then he gave a small nod. Not approval. Respect. Real respect. "Then I will need to fix something," he said. Emily did not respond. She did not need to follow him into that thought. It was his now. Jonathan stood slowly, smoothing the front of his jacket out of habit, but the gesture carried less performance than before. He picked up the check folder, not opening it again, just holding it for a moment before setting it aside. "Thank you," he said. 2 words. Simple. But this time, they were not automatic. Emily gave a small nod in return. Nothing more. And as Jonathan turned to leave, the space he stepped into felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. And behind him, Emily remained exactly where she had always been. Calm, quiet, unmoved, but no longer unseen. Jonathan did not leave the restaurant immediately. He stepped away from the table, but his pace slowed as he moved past the rows of white linen and quiet conversations, his mind no longer tracking the room, but replaying every word that had just been said. Numbers shifted in his head. Not projections. Not forecasts. Truth. Clean. Unadjusted. He reached the exit, the cool air from outside brushing against him as the door opened briefly for another guest, but he did not step through. Not yet. Instead, he stopped just to the side, pulling his phone from his pocket with a motion that had returned, but changed. This time, it was not habit. It was intent. He unlocked the screen and opened a secure file, the same report, the same model that had once felt complete. His eyes moved faster now, sharper, cutting through the layers that had once looked polished and reliable. He saw it clearly now. The absence, the missing variable, the quiet removal that had shifted everything without drawing attention. He scrolled to the analyst name at the top of the report and held it there for a moment. 5 years. Trust built on consistency, or on something else entirely. His thumb hovered over the contact icon, then pressed. The call connected almost immediately. Jonathan, the voice on the other end said, confident, familiar. "Everything ready for tomorrow's briefing?" Jonathan did not answer right away. He looked through the glass of the restaurant, his gaze landing back on the table he had just left, where Emily now moved again, collecting plates, resetting the space as if nothing had happened. "Walk me through the Singapore model," he said finally, his tone even, controlled, but stripped of everything unnecessary. A pause. Short. Almost imperceptible. "Of course," the voice replied. "We projected 12% adoption based on what timeline?" Jonathan interrupted. Silence. "Not long, but enough." "Year 1, the voice answered. Jonathan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Including regulatory approval?" Another pause. "Longer this time." "That factor was considered," the voice said carefully. Jonathan's expression did not change. "Was it modeled?" he asked, or assumed. The silence that followed was different. Not hesitation. Calculation. The kind that searched for a safe answer. Jonathan did not wait for it. "Send me the original framework," he said. Unedited. The word landed clearly. Deliberately. On the other end, the voice shifted. Subtle, but real. "Jonathan, the current version is optimized for the original," Jonathan repeated. No increase in volume. No edge. Just finality. Another pause. Then, "I will have it sent within the hour." The call ended. Jonathan lowered the phone slowly, his reflection faintly visible in the glass beside him. For a moment, he stood there, the noise of the city outside blending with the quiet inside, 2 worlds separated by a thin layer of glass and something less visible. Then he turned back, not toward the exit, toward the dining room. Inside, Emily had already moved on to another table, her presence returning to what it had always been for everyone else. Quiet, efficient, unnoticed, but not to him. Not anymore. Jonathan walked back a few steps, stopping just far enough not to interrupt, just close enough to see her clearly again. She did not look up. She did not need to. The distance between them had already been crossed. He stood there for a second, then another, not as a customer waiting, as a man reconsidering something he had accepted for too long. Finally, he turned again, this time toward the door, pushing it open and stepping into the night. The air was cooler now, sharper, the kind that woke you up without asking permission. Jonathan paused on the sidewalk, his phone still in his hand, the weight of it different than before. Then he slipped it into his pocket, straightened his jacket once more, and looked out at the city lights stretching beyond him. Somewhere between the numbers and the silence, something had shifted. Not in his company. Not yet. But in him. And that was where it would begin. The email arrived at 6:12 the next morning. No subject line. Just an attachment. Jonathan opened it before his first meeting, before his assistant could step in with the day's schedule, before the rhythm of his world could resume and smooth everything back into place. The original framework. Unedited. Unpolished. Honest. He read it once. Then again. Slower. This time, he saw the structure beneath the presentation, the logic that had once been intact before it was reshaped into something easier to approve and harder to question. The delay variables were there. Clearly defined. Impossible to ignore. The adoption curve was cautious. Realistic. Not impressive on paper, but accurate. He leaned back in his chair, the early morning light cutting across the glass walls of his office, casting long reflections that did not quite align. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he pressed the intercom. Cancel the first 2 meetings, he said. No explanation. None was needed. By 7 o'clock, his boardroom was filled. Not with investors. Not with clients. With the people who had built the numbers he had trusted. The analyst stood at the far end of the table, confident at first, composed in the way that came from years of approval without resistance. Jonathan did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He simply placed 2 documents side by side on the table. Explain the difference, he said. The room went quiet. The analyst began to speak, carefully at first, then faster, layering justification over omission, strategy over accuracy. Jonathan listened, fully, without interruption. And when the explanation ended, he asked only one question. Which version reflects reality? The silence that followed was longer than any answer. It was enough. By 8:30, decisions had been made. Quietly. Precisely. Not dramatic. But final. The kind that did not need to be announced to carry weight. By noon, Jonathan stood outside the same restaurant, the city moving around him in its usual rhythm, unaware of the small correction that had already begun to ripple outward. He stepped inside. The room looked the same. The light. The tables. The quiet conversations. But he did not see it the same way. Not anymore. Emily was there, exactly where she had been the night before, moving between tables with the same calm efficiency, the same quiet presence that asked for nothing and revealed everything if you knew where to look. He did not approach immediately. He watched for a moment, not as a man assessing, as a man understanding. Then he walked toward her. Emily noticed him this time before he spoke, not because he demanded attention, because awareness had always been part of who she was. Good afternoon, she said, her tone steady, professional, unchanged. Jonathan gave a small nod. Emily, he said. Not sir. Not miss. Her name. He paused for a moment, as if choosing the exact words mattered more than speaking quickly. The original model, he said. It held. Emily studied him for a brief second. Not surprised. Just confirming. It would, she replied. Jonathan nodded once. I corrected it, he said, and the decisions that followed. Emily did not ask what that meant. She did not need to know the details to understand the outcome. Good, she said simply. The word carried no praise. No relief. Just acknowledgement. Jonathan looked at her, the space between them no longer defined by status or assumption. I meant what I said, he continued. About coming back. Emily's expression remained calm. I know. A small pause. Then, and I meant what I said. Jonathan held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he nodded again. Not pushing. Not persuading. Understanding. Then I will make sure the room is worthy of you, he said. Emily did not respond immediately. She picked up a glass from a nearby table, straightened it slightly, then looked back at him. "Make sure the truth stays in it," she said. Jonathan allowed the smallest hint of a smile. Not the kind he used before. Something quieter. "It will," he said. He stepped back then, not turning away immediately, but giving the moment the space it deserved. Around them, nothing had changed. And everything had. As Jonathan walked toward the door once more, he did not carry the certainty he had arrived with the day before. He carried something else. Something heavier. Something clearer. And behind him, Emily returned to her work, the same as always. Calm. Precise. Unshaken. Because she had never needed the room to recognize her. Only the truth to remain unchanged. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything.